This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about Sulika. We know that Sulika would not denounce her belief in Judaism. She would not officially profess her belief in Islam. She considered this an abandonment of the faith of Avraham Avinu, and she gave up her life, despite the fact she was putting the entire community in peril. And the Rav of the city came to Sulika and said, Sulika, well, what about Esther? Esther lived with Achashverosh in order to save the Jewish people. So interestingly, Sulika made a distinction between what Esther did with Achashverosh and the predicament that she was in. Sulika said, well, Esther never had to abandon the faith of Avraham Avinu. She ein Esther magedes asama v'smoiladata. But to actually denounce Judaism and to accept another faith, that I'm required to give up my life for. Now that is a very that is a point that is worthy of our analysis, because we mentioned when we were at the house of the Rambam that the entire basis of the Rambam's work, Iggeres HaShmad, is that a Jew is not required to give up their life in order to save themselves. Instead, one is required to profess their belief in Islam, which is not halachically considered avodah zarah according to the Rambam. So the question is, was Sulika, in her viewpoint, doing differently than what was recommended by the Rambam in the Iggeres HaShmad? After all, the Rambam's basis of the Iggeres HaShmad is that under the circumstances, a Jew is required to publicly denounce their belief in Judaism, accept the faith of Ishmael, and practice Judaism in secret. So again, this is just a story. We don't know exactly what Sulika's halachik basis was, but I will share with you that it would seem that Sulika did indeed act correctly, avaloi l'tama, not for the reason that she purportedly gave. Because one, in fact, is not required or even allowed to give up their life to denounce Judaism and accept Islam. However, there's a very interesting tshuva in the Shas of Tshuvas Noid B'Yehuda about a woman who was the city was under siege, and the Jewish community was threatened, and they were in peril, and the woman had the opportunity to save the city by having illicit relations with the general. If she would have lived with the general, if she would have been nival to the hegemon, she would be able to save the city. And the question was brought to the attention of Noid B'Yehuda whether this woman would be allowed to live with the hegemon in order to save the city, following the example of Esther Hamalka, who lived with Achashverosh to save the Jewish people. And the Noid B'Yehuda paskin that it is absolutely forbidden for a woman to live with the heathen general to save the city. Says the Noid B'Yehuda, when was it mutter for Esther? That's only in order to save the entire Jewish people. When it's a matter of the well-being of all of Klal Yisrael, then a woman would be allowed to be mezana to save the Jewish people. But if it's only one community, if it's only one city, then Yehareg V'al Yavar, she would not be able to do that. So it would seem that what Sulika did was correct, avaloi l'tama, not for the reason mentioned in the storybooks. The reason why she was required to give up her life is because even though the Jewish community was in peril, but it was only one particular area, one particular city. And one cannot save a city of Jews by violating one of the three cardinal sins. By the way, the question arises, how was Avraham allowed to say about Sarah that she's my sister in order for Avraham to save his life? But according to the Noid B'Yehuda, one is only allowed to live with the king to save the entirety of the Jewish people. And here, Sarah was saying to Paroi that she's Abraham's sister just to save Abraham, but not to save all of Klal Yisrael. And an interesting, right? You get the a good question, right?
Was all of Klal Yisrael.
Oh, very good. there's a concept and there's an idea that Mishpacha Singer was mechaven to, that Avraham Avinu, latent in Avraham, is the entirety of the Jewish people. And the proof is, Hashem told Avraham, V'escha l'goy gadol, I will make you a great nation. And Rashi says, Zeh sha'imrim Elokei Avraham. So the Mizrahi asks, Hashem promised Avraham, you will be a great nation. How is that fulfilled by Jewish people saying Elokei Avraham? It's a nice praise to Avraham, but how is it fulfilled by we acknowledging Avraham as Elokei Avraham? The answer the Mizrahi says is God never associates with an individual. So how could Hashem say Elokei Avraham? How could we say Elokei Avraham? Avraham's only an individual. Says the Mizrahi, that demonstrates Avraham is not an individual. Avraham is reckoned the entirety of the Jewish people. And therefore Sarah was allowed to live with Paroi to save Avraham, because Avraham is considered the entirety of the Jewish people. So that would be a little bit of Inyane Halacha on the decision and the conduct of Sulika. Yehi Zichra Baruch.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.